Hello, my name is Tony Phillips. I'm author of the complete guide to the Olympus OMD E-M1 Mark II. I'm here today to talk to you about some of the unobvious things about the E-M1 Mark II. Now, if you've owned this camera, then you understand that the menu is quite complex and there are many things that you can change. Some of them are fine nuances, others are much more detailed and much more complex. Lots of the settings interact with each other, and some of the settings which you need in order to change something can be distributed through the menu system. It's for this reason that I wrote the book, to help give some guidance on how to get the most out of your E-M1 Mark II. Let's talk about the in-body image stabilization for a moment. On the face of it, the in-body stabilization allows you to run at a slower shutter speed than you would normally need to use for any given light situation. And indeed, that's one of the advantages of this system. Stabilization in the E-M1 Mark II is nothing short of spectacular. It works really well. It especially works well in video mode, where it almost gives a Steadicam kind of image stabilization. So you can use the image stabilizer to shoot at a slower shutter speed, but the other thing that you can use the image stabilizer for is to shoot at a lower ISO. So if you've tested ISO with this camera, you can see that there's a point above which you don't want to set ISO so that you get too noisy of pictures. If you look at this image from my book, you can see that I've tested the ISO range. I've selected the level that works for me. The image stabilizer means that I can set that as my upper limit and still get handheld shots in very low light. For these particular images, I set ISO at a fixed 200 and I wanted to see just how slow the shutter speed could go and still maintain sharp detail. This image was shot at 1/4 of a second and ISO 200 for maximum clarity. There's a section in my book which talks about the reciprocal rule, and this is the slowest shutter speed that you can handhold the camera without inducing blur caused by camera shake. Now, there's a direct relationship between the reciprocal rule and image stabilization. The reciprocal rule states that for full-frame cameras, the minimum shutter speed should exceed 1 divided by the effective focal length of the lens. For the E-M1 Mark II, use 1 divided by 2 times the effective focal length of the lens. Which means that if you're using a 40mm lens, then the minimum shutter speed should be 1/80th of a second. If you want to maintain low ISO and avoid camera shake as well, then you need to take into account the in-body stabilization contribution, the reciprocal rule for the minimum shutter speed, and your ISO, and of course your exposure with shutter speed and aperture, to keep the shutter speed within the range that will avoid blur. The image stabilizer works for non-Olympus lenses as well because it's built right into the body of the camera. This particular lens is an SMC Pentax 1.4 50mm lens. For non-Olympus lenses like this, you need to visit the custom menu, H1, Lens Info Settings, and create for yourself a lens. Here's one which I created earlier for a Meyer Gorlitz Trirplan 100 lens. So let's dive in and have a quick look at what's in there. Obviously, you can name the lens. You can enter a focal length for the lens, and you can enter the minimum aperture for the lens. Now, this focal length is important because if when you attach the non-Olympus lens, you visit this menu and select it from amongst the lenses which you've entered, then that focal length is used by the image stabilizer to provide accurate stabilization for the lens. Now, the interesting thing about the stabilizer is that if you go in and you select a stabilization mode, you can see that if you press Info, you can also enter a focal length for the lens. Now, this is very important, but how does it interrelate with the setting in H1 for Lens Info Setting? The Lens Info Setting, focal length, will override this if you select that lens when you attach the lens to the camera. If you only have one adapted lens or one non-Olympus lens, then there's no need to go into that menu and select it. It will be automatically selected when a non-Olympus lens is put onto the camera. What this setting is for is if you want to fine-tune a lens like a known lens, you can come in here and change this on the fly, and then this will override both the setting for an Olympus lens or the setting for an attached non-Olympus lens. So to get to this, go in through the Super Control panel, press OK, and then press Info, and you can override the focal length setting for image stabilization. This is the only thing that this setting actually affects, and it's important to know that if you've put lens information in H1 Lens Info Settings, then the focal length of that particular lens that you've selected becomes the focal length for the image stabilizer. If you're using a non-Olympus lens, you should do this whether you're shooting stills or video. One of the neat little features about the E-M1 Mark II is that you can edit pictures right in the camera. Now you can edit both RAW files and JPEG files, but the options available for each are quite different. To edit a JPEG, just press OK and see the options which you have available. You can change shadow adjust, you can do a red eye fix, you can crop, change the aspect ratio, change it to black and white, sepia, saturation, resize the image, or do an e-portrait adjustment. Once you select the edit which you would like to apply, you just simply select yes. The camera reports that it's busy and then produces a new JPEG image for you. Now you can do this as many times as you like. You could even do it on this JPEG image which we've just created. RAW editing gives you much more flexibility. You can do a RAW edit with the current settings on the camera. So whatever mode the camera is currently set up for, you can apply those settings to the RAW file and produce a new JPEG, or you can do several custom edits. You can apply art brackets. No means cancel. If you select custom edit, then you're given an LCP style selection menu where you can alter the image quality, the picture mode, including all the art filters, white balance, exposure compensation, shadow midtone, highlights adjustments, and so on. So this is really reworking the RAW file into a new JPEG image and applying pretty much any setting that you could have used to shoot that originally. If you use continuous autofocus, CAF mode, then there's a setting which you really want to know about. I call this the tenacity mode. To find this setting, dive into the custom menus and A1 and scroll down to CAF lock. You will see in this setting that you can adjust between plus and minus 2 or between tight and loose, but it's not very clear what this actually means. The manual says that this sets the tracking sensitivity for CAF, but it really sets the tenacity with which the camera stays locked on a subject or how easily it gets distracted by something passing between the lens and the subject. Now you might think that selecting full tenacity mode might be just the setting that you want, but it really isn't. It depends entirely on the subject. For instance, if you're panning on a cyclist and a tree or a street sign or a parked car or something comes between the cyclist and the camera, what do you want the camera to do? Presumably you want it to stay in full tenacity mode and stay locked on your cyclist. What about if you're at a racetrack and you're waiting for a car or horse to pop out of the main straight at full speed? Now what do you want the camera to do? Do you want it to stay locked on the barricade where it was? Or do you want it to jump to the car or the horse and start tracking that? So you want the tenacity mode to be low, but you don't want it to be completely low, because if it was, then all of those lights and signs and stuff which surround the edge of these places would easily distract the camera and you would lose tracking. So when you're using continuous autofocus and you want tracking, be aware of the fact that this CAF lock setting is really how tenaciously the camera will stay locked on its subject and not be distracted. The unfortunate thing is that the setting is actually in the custom menus and it takes a bit of a menu dive, and you're going to want to pay attention to it pretty much every time that you're doing something where you want this to track accurately. The E-M1 Mark II has a kind of a mouse mode for when you have your eye to the EVF to relocate the AF target. If you'd like to use that mode, then there are a couple of things that you need to do. In A2, there is a setting called AF targeting pad, and you need to turn that on. Now, when you put your eye to the EVF, you just put your finger on the LCD and move it around, and what you see is the yellow AF target moving to whichever location you've put it. Now this works no matter which of the AF target groups you've used, whether you've got multiples or a single AF target. Obviously when it's over your subject, just shoot away. One little tip if you use this is that you can temporarily disable this AF targeting with a touch by tapping the LCD. You'll see a little off icon in the upper right of the viewfinder, and if you tap the LCD again, it'll come back on. So there you go. That's a few of the unobvious things and some of the obvious things about camera. These are the kind of insights that you will see in the book. As well, you'll learn how to use the flash so it doesn't look like you've used a flash, how to use a smartphone to send pictures and to control the camera, all about wireless flash, which is truly the best tool that you can use to dramatically improve your photography. Obviously, we could talk about this camera for a long time, but that's why I wrote the book. While you can buy the book in hard copy, I recommend the PDF, which you can find on my website or freedmanarchives.com. Let me give you a quick look at the PDF version of the book. This is on a 7-inch tablet. There's a very thorough table of contents in the book and an index as well, and it's all fully hyperlinked, so you can just touch whichever section of the book that you're interested in and then jump to that section. There are many tips in the book, in fact over 500 tips, giving you a much more detailed inside look at how the camera functions and how to get the most out of it. To encourage you to buy the book, I'm including a couple of bonuses. They're not included directly with a download of the book. You need to send me an email with your purchase receipt, and I will personally email down the links for you. One of these bonuses is a spreadsheet with all of the settings for the E-M1 Mark II. It has a brief description of what each setting is for, how I set it in my camera, and a column for you to write down your own setting or any other notes that you'd like. In addition to that, I've created the Go Anywhere companion settings, which is a phone-sized PDF which contains every setting in the E-M1 Mark II's menus. Now these are organised according to the settings in the camera, shooting menus, video menu playback, the 20 custom menus and the rest of the 20 custom menus and the setup menu. This is fully hyperlinked so that if you're interested in a setting in one of these, then you can simply go there and read the description. There's also a section reference for where you can find more information in my book. It's very easy to jump back to the main contents page. Every single page has a hyperlink which just basically drops you back there. It's also fully searchable because it's in a PDF format and you can use the search engines inside of the PDF. In fact, that's why I recommend the PDF books, because they are fully searchable. So that's it. Thank you.